Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of the Eisner Award-winning comic Zatanna, Bring Down the House, and the Eisner Award-winning graphic novel Roaming, as well as the soon-to-be-released graphic novel This Place Kills Me with artist Nicole Gu. It's Mariko Tamaki. Thanks for coming on, Mariko.
Thank you for having me.
So we're recording this later in the day on Tuesday, August 5th. We were talking a little before we started recording about how it's been a little chaotic. How has the day been for you?
It's been a good day. I usually write in my office, but today I tried to write like in a coffee shop, and I forgot that it's it's just like not your choice of music, and so I ended up having to put Great British Bake Off on in the background because that's like the white noise that I'm used to. So I didn't get as much done as I wanted to get done.
You can write with Great British Bake Off playing behind you?
I almost always write with something playing.
I totally get that, but for some reason in my head when I'm writing, all the wires get crossed as soon as there's like lyrics or words to pay attention to. And you are, one of a kind. That is unbelievable.
Take into consideration, I've seen each of those episodes probably 100 times. Like it's not like it's not like I'm like, I hope the pastry's okay. Like it's very predictable to me. So I used to write Batman playing the Dark Knight in the background. And so I've seen that movie maybe like 50 times because I just play the opening sequence, especially for Batman. I really love for like a propulsive feeling. I get a lot of like, I guess it's like vibe from listening to things in the background.
So it becomes, it really does become white noise for you at a certain point.
Yes. And I find it way less distracting than the actual white noise of people talking about their boyfriends and stuff like that in coffee shops.
That's amazing. Well, good for you. Also, I feel like you've just given me a shove to finally watching the Great British Bake Off, something that people have recommended to me endlessly, but I've never actually done it. If you are so dedicated to it that it becomes white noise for you, I apparently am very much missing out on it.
I just like the way people talk in that show too. I find there's a kind of like not, you can't watch American reality TV when you're writing because it's so forced and almost scripted that I find that really distraction actually. But the different kind of British people just like being excited to be somewhere is fine by me.
Yeah. I did want to ask before we get into the meat of the conversation. I know you just got back from San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah.
Are you recovered yet? Is that something you need to recover from, or are you pretty good at
absolutely.
You are?
No, I'm terrible at it. It's not easy. I find it all really overwhelming. The good news is, and I really noticed this the last time, I really love getting to see all of my writer friends when I'm there. And it's something I've done now for, almost 10 years. And so getting to see people that you don't get to see, especially now that I don't live in Oakland, getting to see all the comic people there. And it's really fun to see, your fellow writers. But the general like my nightmare is the Marriott Hotel next to the convention center, and the fact that every time you get on that elevator, I feel like there's like a guy in a lab coat behind a one-way mirror watching me freak out trying to get on that elevator to go up to my room or leave. Like it's so jarring to me. It's like I always run the battery out of my headphones because I just can't stand the overall noise. But it's also fascinating, like to watch it evolve. Like the number of keychains that you can get now at San Diego Comic-Con has like quadrupled. It's all keychains now, like stuffed animals on keychain. No, just like Labubus and stuff like that. It's like Labubu Central now. Whereas it used to be like you wanted to get like a comic. Like it used to be that there were just stalls and stalls of, dudes selling comics. Now there's like 15-year-olds buying Labubus and like stuffed animals to put on their bags. So I'm like, interesting.
I did think it was funny. I was reading the Beats recap, the winners and losers of San Diego Comic-Con, and that was honestly the first time I'd ever experienced the word Labubu. And apparently they were a huge winner for 2025.
They were everywhere. They totally picked their moment and set up like camp outside of the convention and were like giving them away. And I already have the stuffed animals on my bag, so I don't need any more. But I was like, oh wow, this is really, even just like the sort of general cutesiness of San Diego has gone up exponentially. So that was really kind of interesting.
Yeah. I do want to bring up one thing that happened this year. I was nominated for an Eisner last year alongside
Oh,
you, but you actually got to run up. You put in some steps getting up to that thing last year, but this year you also won. You and the rest of the Zatanna Bring Down the House team deservedly earned an Eisner Award. And what I mean for best limited series, I just have to give a quick shout out. What a team! I mean Javier
uh,
Rodriguez, the best in the business. Hassan Otsmanel, how amazing! But I do want to quote something in specific. Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast quoted you as saying, "I'm going to be one of those people who says Andrea Shea is a fucking genius."
yeah.
I want to give you a soapbox to expand on that because everyone I talk to loves Andrea. I've talked to her on Blue Sky a lot. She's great. What makes her amazing?
I mean, first of all, you have to give a shout out in general to Marvel and DC editors because what they are doing is so intensely difficult. They are like encyclopedic experts on a world, a fake world. They have to know everything that is going on with every single character. And they have to be a kind of fan that is a loving but impartial fan that understands how all of these characters work and don't work. They have to understand the inner workings. They move from like the Superman group to the Batman group. They have to be experts on it all. And on top of that, they have to really, on such an insane schedule, coordinate writers and illustrators and letterers and colorers and all of these things to bring like they're really such team captains, and Andrea Shea is just a uniquely amazing team captain. She's such a like an emotional supporter slash great editor. Like there are some great editors who just can see where things need to go and are just very good at figuring out 22 pages or whatever your page count is, and Andrea just has a way of bringing you into the joy of writing the thing that you're writing and then bringing the whole team in. She puts great teams together and she holds those teams together in a way that is just really like uniquely amazing. That said, I've worked with a lot of amazing editor. I've also got to work with Paul Kamitsky for a long time at DC, and he's also an amazing editor. Um, but I think Andrea just like brings through these sort of unique groups of people. And it was really great to see other people, calling her out and saying how amazing that is. And I think it's worth noticing, like, oh, wow, this person who really dedicates this time and energy to a group of people is seeing results, which is comics that people are really happy with and really impressed by.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I like that you shouted out kind of everyone when like the big two, the Marvel and DC editors, because even though people probably are like, oh, they're Marvel and DC editors that's like, working for a big company and everything. But you said fake world. I mean, people treat these like they're real. You get things wrong and you're going to get called out like like you committed a mortal sin. And it's in a lot of ways kind of a thankless job.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm always so impressed by the the thick skin that they have, but also their ability to just not really make that like they should. If I did, I'd make mistakes all the time. I'm like, I don't know what Doom was doing then. I don't know what's going
Well,
on. They
They
do.
they
They know.
do. And
Yeah.
also I think that it's worth noting like the first time I took on or one of the first times I took on a big property was when I did She-Hulk for Marvel. And I
Uh-huh.
went back and I read, because I wasn't as well acquainted with all of them. I went back and read as much as I could. And there really is such a because she's been written by so many different people.
Right.
There is like a diversity, and some she's more of a badass and some she's more kind of coy. Like she really changes over the years, over the many, many years that she's been written by different people.
Right.
So I do feel like it's worth noting that you can decide to love, and it's great for you as a fan to love the version of this character that you love best. But to then attack anybody that doesn't come out with that version as you wanted it to be is kind of to me, a misunderstanding of what makes comics so amazing. Like,
Right.
you don't see Wonder Woman drawn the way she was drawn, when she first came out, because the style of comics has changed. It doesn't, I mean, you can say, doesn't have to say it's like evolved, it's just changed
Yeah.
because, we as readers change. Like our attention spans have changed. What kind of plot we expect out of these books has changed. The kind of emotions you expect out of these characters has changed. Like all of these things are constantly moving around. And I think some of the best editors are the people who kind of work with you on that. Like, I worked with Andrea on Crush and Lobo, and it was really fun actually for us to kind of have free reign because Crush hadn't been as well established. Uh, but there is a pressure when you're dealing with Batman or when you're dealing with Superman or any of those characters to get it right. And your editor is always the person who's like your emotional support,
Yeah.
like person to be like, it's okay. Like, we're still making this story. It's going to be fine.
Do you feel like your experiences working with editors at Marvel, at DC, at varying places shaped your own editorial voice when you did Shirley books over at Abrams?
Oh, yeah. I mean, every editor that I've worked with has made me sort of aware of the sort of language of editing and how to be supportive. I mean, of course, it's very, I think the thing that as a writer working with editors is that how you feel supported by an editor is a very personal thing. Some people really want to be left alone, like
Yeah.
some people really don't want, like, I guess it depends whether or not your mom came with you to Little League. You know what I mean? Like some people really want a hand on the shoulder and like this very deep dive of like emotional support. Some people want to be left alone. I try to be very clear about what I'm doing as an editor when I talk with people so that I make it clear that it's what I'm doing. It's not like, and if it's not working for you, then we can discuss it. You know what I mean? Like, not to say like this is how editing works, because one thing you learn very quickly is that all editors are different. There's no writer, especially in comics, there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Right. I mean, I think that that's one of the interesting things. I mean, you're not alone in this regard, but you have worked with a lot of really, I don't know, I don't even know what the best way to phrase it. I mean, incredibly talented artists. You've
Oh, yeah.
obviously we were talking about this before. Obviously, comics are heavily defined by the visuals, but like you have worked with, I mean, you worked with Nicole Gu on This Place Kills Me, who is amazing, and we're going to talk about later. You've worked with your cousin, Jillian Tamaki, who is amazing. But I mean, Javier Rodriguez, Rosemary Valero O'Connell, Guri Hiru, who I think is, I mean, they're just spectacular. And
Yeah.
I want to give a quick shout out. I actually think that one of the more underrated artist projects or whatever in the last like decade was the Harley Quinn book you did, Harley Quinn Breaking
With
Glass.
Steve
Like
Pugh.
Steve Pugh was unbelievable in that
Well,
book.
and I fell in love with Steve Pugh when I saw his Flintstones.
Oh, so good. So good. Yeah.
Right. And I just thought, oh, he does this thing which has this, it's such a unique style. It also reminds me of I want to say Jason Latour, like this kind of scratchy, kind of like, you know, there's something almost figure drawing about it, but it's still in a cartoon style. Like I just love that kind of version of things. And I knew when I saw him draw Fred Flintstone and I was hyping the comic to somebody and I was like, Fred Flintstone is actually hot in this comic. Like you're they did the impossible, which is Fred Flintstone is hot, and you should read this comic. And I just knew that he would draw adults to look really adult. Like I just knew that it was going to have that gritty Gotham vibe that Marie Javins, who was the editor on that, really wanted.
I have to say that is one of my all-time favorite comics to recommend, the Flintstones run, just because
Yes.
the gap between what people expect when you recommend it versus what they get is about as significant as you could possibly ask for.
I really love, like, one of my favorite things is when somebody will say to me, like, I'm not a comics reader. Can you recommend like 5 comics? I always ask people to give me like 5 so that you can give them, like, I feel like people are surprised sometimes if they know you from a graphic novel world, if you recommend like Marvel and DC Comics.
Right.
And it's always so great to say, like, it's a big comic book store and you should look at all of it. Like, I think it's really hard to kind of wade into the world of like Marvel and DC if you don't know anything about it because you're like, there's so many.
Yeah.
Like, how am I going to read the right issue? And also because the whole issue versus like compilation, they're like, I'm not going to pick up an issue of Superman. I'm not going to know what's going on. And you're like, okay, great. You should read this collection of Gene Yang's work on Superman. And that is a really interesting, like, entry point into his storytelling, his character work, all of that stuff with a superhero character that is very familiar.
Yeah. And with great art from Guri Hiru, if you read the Superman Smashes the Klan book.
Oh,
But yeah, amazing stuff. But the question I want to ask about artists though is you've worked with, I mean, there's so many more artists I could mention, but you mentioned editors, you're always learning from editors. Do you think you've learned about comics from the different artistic partners you've had along the way?
Oh, totally. I mean, it's worth noting that I started in comics with my cousin,
Right.
and it was a very hands-off process. I gave her a script, and then she came back like a year later with a book. And my script didn't have any panel descriptions or anything. It was essentially like a screenplay that she then like put into panels. And I was so new to comics that I was in fact shocked when I saw that there were panels. It's like, oh, okay, cool. I didn't know we were doing panels, but okay.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know anything about that. And I had to go from that to working on with Steve Rolston on the Amico Superstar comic. So I worked with Shelley Bond and I had kind of a crash course in this is how you write an actual comics page and this is how much stuff you can put in there. And I think over the years, because it's been like 10 years or whatever now, maybe more than that, it's been interesting to see like how that process has shaped how I even think of stories. Like now I really see a page. And
Yeah.
especially if I know the artist, like I can kind of get a sense of what the page is going to look like and how I can write to that.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things though, is like, I always hear from people, from writers who work with different artists, and they're always like, I thought I knew what they were going to come up with. And then like you work with Javier Rodriguez, like how do you predict what Javier is going to do in like that Zatanna book? Maybe you had a
I
good idea.
I had worked with him. I had worked with him. What
What
was
was it
it? What did
on?
he and I work with? Was it the Green Arrow? Now I want to look it up. Is that rude when we're on a podcast?
No, no, it's fine. You worked with him in the past though, so you
I
had
worked with
some
him in the past,
sense.
so I had some sense. I knew that he just had this incredibly, like every artist has their own kind of playfulness, you know, like Javier especially has this really artful playfulness that's also narrative, right? Like he does this thing where his flourishes and his kind of filigree is also telling a story. And he has a really unique way of taking the script and really like fleshing it out with something that is both decorative and playful and also is really carrying you forward and with some information about the character and he puts things in the background so he I knew that he could do that. um so yeah, I was just really curious, and then I think what happened was I saw typically what happens is you see like the first page and then that's like a real jumping off point where you're like, oh, okay, it's going to be like this. Or like, oh, okay, we're sort of doing this. So that's good to know. Like, you know, check that. And as soon as I saw the first pages, I was like, oh, this is going to be great.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
oh, okay, amazing. Like I
He
can lean into it even more, you know, like that's the best.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. As one of the most innovative comic publishers, Vault Comics has released some of the most exciting independent comics of the past 10 years. Vault's current lineup includes a murderer's row of titles like Post Malone's brand new comic series Big Rig, Money Shot Big Bang by Patton Oswalt, Tim Seeley, and Garth Graham, and the hit sapphic shenanigans of Corn Howell's Lilith, all of which are available at your local comic shop. Vault's backlist boasts a who's who of comic creators, many of whom have been guests on this very podcast, including titles from the likes of Rom V, Cy Spurrier, Christopher Cantwell, Tim Seeley, Aaron Campbell, Liana Kangas, and many more. Vault is even giving off-panel listeners 10% off on orders of Vault titles from www.vaultcomics.com by using the code OFFPANEL, that's one word, at checkout. So go to Vault's website and use the code OFFPANEL at checkout for 10% off your entire order. And now, back to the show. He has like a theatricality and musicality to his work that I think
Yes.
pairs nicely with Zatanna as a character, but also, I mean, you were talking about Skim earlier, the book you did with Jillian
My
that
first
was
one, yeah.
the first one. And like, I read that you had actually originally, you'd done a short comic version, but then you were
Mhm.
writing it as a play. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I think that's one of the things I thought was interesting when I was researching for this is like it seems like you're interested in a lot of things. Like you've written novels, comics and graphic novels. You're a performance artist. You wrote a play version of Skim. And at one point you were working on a PhD for linguistic anthropology. And that's probably just the tip of the iceberg.
I have
It's,
looked into a lot of jobs.
at what point, like, was Skim the moment where, comics became something that you thought you could do, or was it even after that?
I was like I had done everything. I had done theater. I grew up in Toronto as an artist, and Toronto is very much a city where it's like, do you want to write a play? Because you can go write a play. Do you want to do stand up? There's a stand up class. Like, do you want to sing? Start a band. Like it was very that mentality. So when um I was on a tour with this woman, Emily Polweary, who had this literary magazine, and she said to me, "Oh, I'm going to do comics." And I was like, "I'll do that. I can do
Yeah.
that." I was like, "My cousin is an illustrator. Like, I basically committed Jillian to doing this before, like, very much
It was
clearing.
just a year. It's not that
I
big of a
was like,
deal.
"Come on, it'll be fun." She was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And like, like I've always said, the best part of that mini comic was it was very low stakes. If either of us hated that experience, it was very easy to walk away and say like, "Okay, well, this took up like, too much of our time, and so we're not going to do it anymore." But so I think mini skim also, like, I was doing so many other things when that was happening. I was in school. I think, in my master's at York University, and then when that came out and it went well, I was already in my PhD when I started working on the graphic novel. When we sold that to Groundwood Books, I started working on that. And it really felt like the first time that I was like, there was like a seriousness to it as I was working on it that felt like something that I really wanted to commit myself to. Like seeing what we could do together was like the first time that I really felt like I would love this was to be my full-time job.
Yeah. I mean, this might be hard to say. I think the answer most people would think would be Skim because it was your first book. But at the same time, it was written in such an unconventional way for comics that you may not have learned as much from it as some might have expected. But which comic project do you think you learned the most about comics and how you wanted to approach them from?
I mean, I think probably working for DC was like the biggest leap forward. Like I'll say like it's like little things like I was working on, can't remember which one. I was working on something. It was either Tomb Raider or it was the Ninja Turtles that I was working on. And I was talking with Joan Hilty, and Joan Hilty, who's also an amazing editor, said to me, "You have no ticking clock." She was like, "Your comics just kind of happen and they're kind of floating along and there's no page turn. You're just kind of like letting the page turn." And she was like, "You need to figure out how to put that kind of tension in what you're writing and how to use the page turn, how to use that whole space in a way that really feels like there's like, some action in your action comics." So that was a huge thing. And then I will say probably the biggest lesson I ever took, like a leap forward, was when I was working on the Dark Detective series. I think because it was the first time that we were doing so many issues. Like it was like, 12 issue arcs, and the timing of it was so intense, and how to really put together a story that really worked as 12 issues. That wasn't just like, and then the next issue and this will happen because this just happened. Like, to really sit down and figure out what the arc was, what was important to us in the series, all of that stuff. So Paul Kaminsky and I really like working with him was such a huge like leap forward for me. And I think that when I eventually went and started writing television, it was a huge help because I wasn't used to the medium of television, but I was very used to to working on like a outline of sort of like issues slash episodes, and then like digging into that and having that same kind of arc in an episode.
I mean, I think that that's the thing that's interesting about probably working in different mediums and also working in different formats is like you were talking about that what Joan Hilty mentioned to you about how like they just kind of they just kind of float for lack of better words. They
Yeah.
don't have that tension and everything. But in like let's say this one summer when you're writing this one summer, that's a book where floating is a plus to some degree. I mean, there's pluses and
Yeah.
minuses to it, where it's like that's more a slice of life. It has more of that type vibe. But if you bring that to detective comics, readers are going to be like, "What are you doing? Like,
I
what is
know.
this? I need a cliffhanger. I need a fight. I
Right.
need some really intense page turns." And it is interesting where it's like you wouldn't think like comics are comics, right? Comics and graphic novels, what's the difference? But there's different expectations for readers, but there's
Oh, huge.
also
Yeah.
different things that work for each different format because the real estate, 20 pages versus what, like 300 or whatever, that's
Yeah.
massive.
It's movies versus television, really. Like it really is like a sense of like, you know, what the sort of loud, soft of it all and figuring out that is really interesting to me. And actually, it's funny because now I feel like having done both, I feel like I like having, and I love reading comics where there's quiet moments of like an almost uncomfortable stillness in between action. Like the thing that I really loved about the Something is Killing the Children series is that there is this kind of like long moments where you're just kind of in this creepy place and you're like reading it, and the whole time you're like, a kid is going to die like any minute now. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I'm enjoying this chillness, but I'm going to turn the page and a kid's going to be dead, you know? So I
Yeah.
do love, like, and I feel like also, I have learned from reading other people's comics. Like, I'm a huge fan of James's. I'm a huge fan of, um, like Tom King's. I'm a huge fan. Like, the Southern Bastards series was one of my favorites. And I love taking little bits from each of those comics and getting inspired to do something like what they're doing in wherever, whatever I'm working on.
I like that you point out the quiet moments. I really love Chip Zdarsky's Public Domain, and I always am
Yeah.
like, I absolutely love that part where it was completely silent for 8 panels. He's like, why do you always bring up the silent parts? I'm like, I don't know, I like the silent parts. It's just,
And like when you're not writing dialogue, man, what can I say? I mean,
yeah, I'm an
I'm a
amazing
big
artist.
fan of that. Yeah. Well, and I
Yeah,
do think that that is, like one of the first like lessons I learned in comics was from Shelley Bond, and she was like, "You're taking up space on a panel with your dialogue. Like you have 5 panels per page, and you want to put 5 lines of dialogue in one of those panels. That's taking up a lot of space, and you have to ask yourself, like, do you want to look at that many words when you're trying to look at, someone's art? Like you have to be really, I'm a taker. I overwrite and then I'm every letter's nightmare, and I apologize in advance because I tend to like overwrite, and then as soon as I actually see things on the page, I like pull half of it out.
uh I have to say, of all the people you could work with early in your career, Shelley Bond is probably a pretty good one, just because I mean, like she literally wrote a book about like basically how to make comics like recently, and so it's you couldn't ask for much better. But I did want to ask about one line you had. You talked about how seeing Javier's first pages, and you were like, okay, I see where we're going with this. Do you prefer working like, for example, This Place Kills Me? Do
Mhm.
you prefer working with do you write full script always or before you start working with the artist, or do you want to see what they're coming up with so you can shape your script towards that person?
It really depends on the publisher and the project. I think that the easiest way, I mean, Nicole and I have actually talked about the process for This Place Kills Me was very odd because it was a murder mystery. And one of the things that ended up changing a lot was we like had to go back and change art because it wasn't working. Like because it was just like the actual flow of information. Like that's what murder mysteries are, is like a flow of information and reveals. So you have to have a certain amount of information to keep track of what's going on, and then you also have to not give away too much, and it's a
Yeah.
very like tempered process. So really for the first time in almost any of my comics experiences, like the art was done also because Nicole is so incredible and so fast, I was like, I think we have to change this because we can't know this, like, or we need to know this. So it was a lot of moving that stuff around. And I really feel like your responsibility as a writer is to have all the information that an artist needs nailed down before they start the heavy load of actually illustrating. So I try to be acquainted with artists, and I try as much as possible to be like ahead of things, and I try to write really quickly. One of the reasons I write as fast as I do is because I want to have as many cracks at fixing things before, so I'm giving the illustrator as much time as humanly possible because what they do takes so much longer than what I do.
You probably have anyone who will ever work with you again, you've just made very happy with that because like editors, and that's the thing I think people forget too, is like, especially when you're working on like a big 2 book, when you're working on where it's, I mean, anyone that has like a monthly book where it's like you always have that deadline. And there's the cascading deadlines where it's like if the writer's script is late, the artist is going to be late, and then the colorist is late, and then the letter is late, and then the editor kills everyone. And it's like I think people forget about that cascading effect from the outside, and it's such a big deal. So yeah, kudos to you. You're probably making a lot of people happy by saying that.
Well, I mean, and I just think it's your job, like and I do think sometimes like you never know. I'm working on this project right now and we did the outline and we were like, yep, this seems good. And then as soon as I started writing, I was like, this is not working. Like as soon as I got into the dialogue and the actual like timing of how everything was happening, I was like, none of this works. And the editor was like, this isn't working.
Yeah.
So we had to really go back to square one. So writing faster gives you a chance to like take a look at it.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then sometimes, sometimes it's just so easy. Like sometimes it's ridiculous where, I mean, and Zatanna was like that. There was almost no going back to the drawing board the whole time we were doing that project because I was just like I was saying to Andre all the time, like, is this like too fast? Like, is this too easy? She was like, yeah, it feels like this is just happening. And I was like, I just feel like this is the ending. And she was like, yeah, this is the ending. So it was great.
It was almost a surprise by how easy and well it was going.
Well, and sometimes it is, like This Place Kills Me was so hard to write because it was this mystery. And it really was like mysteries are just hard to write. Like they're just, for me, they're hard to write. Like just actually hiding information in a visual medium is just tricky.
Yeah.
And so, and it's funny because then when I first gave the book to my partner, my girlfriend, who's also a writer and whose opinion I really obviously hold in high regard, and she liked it, I was like, oh, thank God. Because I was like, I'm so far away from it at this point. I don't know if we've done it, like, because we took so many cracks at it. And I was like, oh, is it good? Is it working? Are you, does it feel like it's working as a murder mystery? And she was like, yes. And I was like, okay,
I will say it
good. Okay.
absolutely works. It
I'm so glad.
absolutely works. I mean, that is, you talked about page turns earlier. I wrote a piece last year or the year before for my site where I talked to a bunch of creators about the art of the page turn because it's such an essential tool in comics. And like fundamentally, like there's no greater mystery in comics than what's going to be on the next page after that last panel. And so, like, if you use that right, I think that that's where a lot of like that mystery comes from.
Mhm.
And I think that you all did it really well. I mean, Nicole, like, there's so many things that Nicole does well. Like, this is a very me thing to say, but like some of my favorite parts of of that book are just the lead Abby Kita. I think it's Kita. Is how you
Yeah.
pronounce it? Yeah, Abby Kita, who's the lead, just laying in bed by herself with her eyes closed, listening to her Walkman with like the music playing over. I
Yeah. The
mean,
mixtape.
the
Yeah.
mixtape, yeah, and like that stuff, like that's not mystery, but it is. It always that's one thing I think is really great about your writing, and this is a funny thing to compliment a writer for, but it feels like you always give your artistic collaborators space to find the right
Oh,
answers for themselves.
100%. 100%. I do think that is what the collaboration is. Like, it really is hard to explain how two people can write a thing that aren't necessarily putting like letters in a script. And it's so much about like what you are laying down as far as character and story goes that is going to be brought to life by the person who's going to actually draw it. And it's, to feel comfortable in that process, I think is a key thing to doing this job. Like I'm very lucky, and I think because I started with Jillian, that I was never like, oh, this person's going to illustrate my story. It was always like, I'm going to work with this person on writing a story or on making a story. Um, and it's such a delight. Like I'm the first person who gets to see this stuff, like getting to see it with Nicole, getting to see it with Jillian. The first time I saw Rosemary's illustrations for Laura Dean,
Oh my
and I was
God.
like, oh my God. I was like, you guys don't even know what's about to come. Like, this is going to be so great.
I don't normally get nervous when I'm doing podcasts, but when it was at New York Comic Con, and it was the year that Laura Dean came out. And I was going to the first second booth to meet up with Rosemary to do a podcast. And when I went up and I said, "Hi, I'm Rosemary." And I
Oh,
was like, "Oh my God, I actually named the podcast Hi, I'm Rosemary,"
hi,
because
I'm Rosemary.
it was such a perfect moment. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Love sci-fi, horror, fantasy, and action? Then 2000 AD is the greatest comic you're not reading. 2000 AD has a whole universe of characters from Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog through to Rogue Trooper, Zenith, Shakara, and many more. In every weekly issue, you get 5 action-packed stories from incredible creators including Garth Ennis, Rob Williams, Alex DeCampi, and Dan Abnett. Get a print subscription and it'll arrive at your door every week, and your first issue is free. Or subscribe digitally, get free back issues, and download DRM free copies of each issue for just $9 a month. That's 128 pages of incredible comics every month for less than $10. And all subscribers get amazing offers like money off vouchers and exclusive products. Head to 2000AD.com and click on subscribe now, or download the 2000AD app and start reading today. And now, back to the show. Yeah, I mean, that is the interesting thing is like, I think people love titles in comics where it's like writer and artist and this and that. And like a lot of times the line is a lot blurrier than that. It's just like kind of co-storytellers in a lot of ways. And like, I think that sometimes it's not as clean as just like this person wrote and this person drew and that's that.
Well, that's why I do like the idea that a book wins an award and not an individual creator. You know what I mean? Like, I do think for comics, like, to give something best book makes more sense to me than say, this person is nominated for the category of best writing for this book, and this person is nominated for the category of best artist. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
the Eisners can do whatever, and I'm super thrilled to have best writing Eisners. But truthfully, it's like the best writing Eisner for Roaming. I was like, this is accepted on behalf of Julie and myself. We both, in that case, literally wrote the script for that. Like,
Right.
She and I actually traded the script back and forth and both wrote on it until it was finished.
Yeah. I mean, that's attribution is such a weird problem in comics. And
yeah.
I mean, it's
a thing.
It's
not
it's
a yeah.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. I will say, this is a very quick aside. I had a very similar trip to the Girls in Roaming when I was in college, and that book haunted me for that reason. I was like, oh no, a reflection of a very bad trip to New York I took when I was in college. But
it haunts me too. Like, honestly, I feel like while we were writing it, it was such like a detox moment afterwards. Like, you'd have to like take a break and remind yourself that you're like 30 years older than the person who did that trip. Like,
yeah.
I was like, okay, Mariko, you're not actually trapped in a subway with someone who's not being very nice to you. Like, you're an adult. You can go have a pudding, like, you're okay.
It's pudding time.
It's pudding time. Yeah.
All right, well, we've already talked about it a bit. Let's talk about This Place Kills Me, your upcoming graphic novel with artist Nicole Gu from Abrams Fanfare that arrives in stores on August 19th, I believe.
Yes.
Everywhere. Yes. So here's an abbreviated take on what it's about. The solicit was very long. It is about a school called Wilburton Academy, the theatrical society at the core of it, and an outsider and transfer student, Abby Kita, and what happens when the star performer from that theater troupe is found dead the morning after the opening night of its latest play in Romeo and Juliet. This book's got it all. School drama, mysteries of murder variety and beyond, roller coaster relationships with your roommate, everything you could want in this type of story. I've read the uncorrected proof. It's great. I'm very excited to see the final version just to see Nicole's colors.
Oh, God, they're so beautiful. Yeah.
Where did This Place Kills Me start? Was it born from wanting to work with Nicole, or was it an idea that you had that you needed to find the right partner for?
Yeah, it was. I think the original thing was I met Nicole. We had kind of like a DC dinner of kind of like, I want to say it was a DC dinner of female artists, but I think that's what it sort of ended up being. It was
sure.
It was like, we all just ended up being women who write for DC Comics. And she was there with Sarah Kuhn, who she did the Batgirl comic with. And I just remember thinking, like, I really like her as an artist and I really love her style. And what would that be great for? What am I sort of thinking of? And I kind of was like I was in that sort of space of like next projects and like what would be a good next project to do. And I just had been working on murder mysteries. That's like in terms of what I read, that's what I read. I love them. And I had done one in prose. And I just thought, I bet you would be really good to do something like kind of retro. And I thought her style would work for that. And so I just like took a leap and was like, contacted her. Was like, is this weird? Would you want to do like a graphic novel with me? This is what I'm thinking of. And she immediately was like, yes. Like, it was like it was not, it didn't seem like it was like a burden. So I was like, this is great. And then I was like, okay, it's gonna take me like, I think I said at the time, like, I have like 1,000 things to do. So it'll probably take me a while to get like an outline to you of what I'm thinking of. And then I immediately ditched everything else I was supposed to do and wrote like, this is what I think it's gonna be, which of course is not what it is. Um, and she was really into it. And she's very like, I've said, we actually had a panel recently at SDCC where I got to think about this out loud. But because Nicole works so much with Dave, works with a partner, where I think that there's a level of honesty in how you talk to somebody that you love about a project that you're working on. And I had had the experience of working with Jillian where we're family. So we're very direct with each other about what we want to do. And so I think we both had that background. And so from the get go, we were very like, I like this, but I don't like this. And this seems like it's working to me, but I'm not really sure that this is working. Like it was a very collaborative, very honest collaboration from the beginning. Uh, and I was like, oh, we're going to do this with Abrams. It's going to be great. And then then we were in it.
Yeah. I feel like that's just to some degree how Nicole and Dave are. I've known them for a long time. And I remember Dave listened to the podcast and I remember him telling me, like, I'm not calling you out, Dave. This is what you told me. He was just like, I love your podcast, but when I'm in the subway, it's hard to, like, the levels are uneven. So it's hard to hear stuff. And he's like, you got to work on that. And I worked on that and I made it better.
Yeah.
But it was funny because, like, most people would just be like, I love the podcast and say nothing else. I appreciate the honesty. Sometimes, like, you just need that honesty from, I mean, in your case, a partner, in my case, a person I was talking to at Emerald City Comic Con.
You know what? I feel like illustrators are the most honest people that I know. Maybe it's because they could like take the world and like draw it on a piece of paper. They're just very like, and also because I work with so many illustrators, in a very direct manner where you have to be very direct. It's very like, I don't like this. This doesn't make like Nicole was very clear as we were working on it. It really shaped the mystery because she would say like, I just don't know why this person is doing this. And there were so many things at play that I was like, it 100% has to make sense. Or, at least the things that don't make sense to us have to be few and far between.
How,
And that really shaped it.
yeah. How collaborative? I mean, it sounds like it was pretty collaborative, but
Oh,
like
yeah.
once you had like the pitch, once you had the ideas solidified, like how collaborative was the development process for the book?
We went back and forth. I think we got the pitch approved. And then also because we both live in LA, we could just like go have dinner. Actually, the best, I don't know, she'll tell her. So I would be like, okay, we'll make it a dinner. I'll send you the script and then we'll have dinner and do notes. And then this one time I picked this restaurant where there was a live band playing,
Oh my.
which is such an LA thing where you're like going to go have a nice meal and then someone's setting up an amp and you're like, oh no, shit, fuck. It's going to be the like getting the mics at the end and you're just like, oh no. And Nicole just
That's
like looked at me like, this is going to suck. And I was like, yeah, actually, we really do have to work. Like we have to talk through this
just
thing.
screaming at each other
Yeah.
about a murder mystery.
Yeah. I don't think she killed him, like very that. But it was, yeah, I mean, it was really nice because I've never had the chance to like live so close to somebody and Nicole comes over, she and I have both a crafty life. So she comes over and crafts and we like sort of talk through things. So it was really nice to be able to sit with someone and just kind of talk through in person what is and isn't working. And that really shaped, like, you know, went through as many drafts until we were both like, okay, this is it. And I think I was sure, like, even though we ended up still having to make more changes, I was like, I'm not, like, we're not going forward until this is working.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that really helped.
Well, and you talked about how Nicole ended up having to redraw some pages to make sure things were set. But I mean, imagine if you hadn't gotten everything ironed in before she started writing. That would or started
No.
drawing. Yeah, that would have
And I
been
think
much worse.
with this kind of story, it really is like you have to be following what is happening. There's so many characters, like you have to be with. There's actually only one example, I think, where the main character's point of view isn't the point of view in the story, or it's like maybe once or twice, but it's like you really are following so much you have to see and understand what's going on. Um, and it's very easy in comics, as someone who has worked on a lot of superhero comics, to not like, there's a reason in Batman comics why, or any sort of superhero comics, why when someone new walks in the room, Batman's like, hey, hey, Supergirl. And Supergirl's like, hey, Batman, where were you last night? I was here. Like, there's a lot of clarification that goes into action comics because you have to be on the same page as
Yeah.
about what's going on. And to to do that artfully in a place where you're not being so, overt about it is a really hard thing to do. And she does it so well in this book.
Do you take that sort of thing and carry that into your scripting for something like this? Because it does have a big cast, and it's like, wait, which one was Jessica? Which one's Claire?
Oh
Who's the
yeah.
roommate? What's going on? Like, is that something you try to do with this sort of book too?
Well, I think the thing is there's a different timeline on comics than there is on graphic novels. So I
Right.
think one of the reasons that you end up doing that kind of like, hey Batman, hey Robin
Right.
type thing is because you just don't have enough time to like go back and change things. Like the scripting to, drawing timeline is much shorter than a graphic novel. So we tried really hard to sort of be in a place where you can kind of like tuck in the edges so that it's not quite so, you know, over the top.
Hmm. How much does your scripting process range from project to project? I imagine it really depends on the creator, or the your creative partner to some degree. Like, as you mentioned with like Jillian, it's like you probably have a shorthand that you don't have with anybody else. But is there a pretty big divide per project, or is it always kind of the same at this point?
It depends. When I work on anything like DC or Marvel, it tends to be pretty quick. That's the fastest, I think, is because I generally, you know, I know the characters. You don't have to make up as much stuff. I'm working on a new project now where we're sort of making up the world, and it's taking longer because you kind of keep having to go back. It's like, there's no like all when you're making up all the truths, it's like a harder task because you
Yeah.
have to kind of decide something and then you're constantly wanting to let it go because it doesn't work with the story you're telling. And then you constantly have to ask yourself, like, is it just that I don't want this to be true? Is it good that if this thing isn't true? Like, should I let go of what I think is one of the laws of this world? Or because it doesn't work with the story? Or do I have to stick with this law because it's going to be like better in the big picture? It's all
I do think
very, ooh.
I do think that that's the funny thing about, like, going back to what you were saying about like superhero comics where you're writing, detective comics. The downside to writing superhero comics is you have to exist in this world that you have to follow the rules of. And like, you can't use Nightwing because Nightwing is doing this at the same time elsewhere. But at the
Yeah,
same time, the upside is you're telling this story in this world that already exists, that has
yeah,
all of the infrastructure set up. That's not true for something like This Place, Kills Me, where it's like, yes, the planet Earth existed and there were academies like Wilburton there, but you still have to populate it and you have to build up the identity and the relationships and everything like that. And
right.
that's different.
And then think of someone like Leigh Bardugo, right? Who is writing this
Right.
fantasy world where she is making up all the rules of that fantasy world, right? So then you have to sort of say to yourself, like, well, this group of people doesn't have this power. And then you're like, I'm sure halfway through the book, she's like, what if I just give them this power? What if it's just like, ugh, let's just give them this power because it's easier. Or let's just say they
Yeah.
have this power now. Like it is very yeah, it's like I don't necessarily like to have that responsibility all the time. Sometimes I like to just be like, can Batman do this? Like one of the hardest things in writing Dark Detective was that Batman's not allowed to kill anybody. Like that's not a thing he does, and that drove me nuts. I was like, why not? I was like, this guy's a jerk. Let's just like, I was like, what if he accidentally just lets go of him and he,
Oops.
oops, like he fell off a building. And Paul would always be like, you can't, Mariko. He doesn't. Like you just have to figure out something else. And it would be fun because sometimes you end up coming up with funny things because he can't kill anybody. But half the time I was like, can we talk to whoever's in charge and ask for like a one-time voucher so I can kill this guy because I think this guy should die.
Yeah. This is a complete aside, but I just have to say, Given the number of fights that guy's been in, he's had to kill somebody by accident at this point.
Even if he caused some severe internal injury that years later ended up killing this person,
Right.
that's the Batman book I would like to write now, is where Batman finds out that he accidentally punched someone in the stomach hard enough that their stomach bled out, and that years later they died, which was still his fault.
But was it though? Was it?
But was
They would,
it?
yeah,
Yeah. And then
he
it's
would have to
like
reconcile with it.
he's like talking to Nightwing's like, it's not your fault, man. Like, you don't even know. Didn't have a great diet, didn't look after himself. Batman's like, I could have made sure that he was okay. You know?
I am 100% in this. I got to read this. This is your next Eisner book. You're gonna be
Yeah.
walking up there again. All
The
right.
long night.
Oh, that's good. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Across more than 25 years of work for Marvel, Image, and more, artist Louis LaRosa has defined himself as a master of the modern comics medium, producing a wholly unique, jaw-dropping style that could only be called carbon-based. Now, Oni Press is proud to present LaRosa's first ever career-spanning retrospective with Carbon Based, The Art of Louis LaRosa, a deluxe oversized art book debuting first on Kickstarter with a bounty of exclusive extras this August. Packed with raw line art, rarely seen covers, character designs, and more. Experience more than 250 pages of LaRosa's hyper-detailed artwork for projects including Fortnite, Uncanny X-Men, Bloodshot, and more in one deluxe hardcover that must be seen to be believed. Featuring appreciations from some of LaRosa's most prominent colleagues, including Lee Bermejo, Jeff Lemire, and Matt Kent. No fan can afford to miss this. Visit Kickstarter.com and search Carbon Based, The Art of Louis LaRosa to follow the campaign and be instantly notified at launch. And now, back to the show. I wanted to ask about Abby Keita, the book's lead.
Yes.
Someone who is new to the school and is an outsider from a pretty insular student base. Very insular student base. I would not want to go to that academy. But she's also figuring herself out along the way. What made her the right lead for this story? Because you mentioned it. It's like she is the point of view character through 98% of it. What made her the lead?
Actually, because it's funny because my partner, who has read a lot of Miss Marple, like
Yeah.
the Agatha Christie books, was talking to me about, the thing about Miss Marple is that she knows everybody in the village. So, when someone dies, she's like, oh, well, Tom's boy used to do this and he used to work at this thing, and it kind of like insider perspective. But I also, because I did this failed degree in anthropology at U of T, know that one of the sort of, ideas, like central ideas of anthropology, is that it's an outsider's perspective, is what gives you insight into how people think. Like, you don't have the same assumptions everybody else has. And so you notice more things. I do think it's also sort of an extension of the sort of queer perspective of when you exist outside of heterosexuality, the kind of like assumptions of heterosexuality seem all that much stranger to you because they don't make sense to you, right? Like, so, like, the idea that Abby, one of the sort of first things that happens in the book when this character dies is everybody says, oh, she had a boyfriend and she killed herself. And one of the first things that Abby says is, if she had a boyfriend, I would know about it because you guys can't stop talking about who has a boyfriend. Like, it is immediately stands out to her. It's not true because she's paying attention to this thing that nobody else is really paying attention to. Like, everybody else just sort of takes that as sort of just like, oh, yeah, like everybody has a boyfriend, right? So she's beautiful. She had a boyfriend, made her sad, and that's why she killed herself. And just to take that immediately as something that kind of rubs her the wrong way is kind of the leaping off point for her into looking into this. And I just think, like, I remember being in high school and just like watching all my friends, change once they started falling in love with these boys and like noticing all these things that they didn't think were strange. And I was like, it is strange though.
Yeah.
That you suddenly like this thing that you hated, or that you decided that you don't understand this thing that you clearly understand, or whatever it was. And I just think that there's a kind of like, I'm overall fascinated with the kind of different kinds of anthropology that exists in like, the layperson's lives of like children are anthropologists of adults because you're constantly looking at them and you're paying attention to what makes them adults. So, that is like the sort of different layers of expertise that come to the people who are outside of something.
I think that I mean, I love everything you just said about that because like that outsider perspective is so necessary for a story like this. Apologies to Agatha Christie, of course. Obviously, you nailed it. Good job by you on
She's
Miss Marple.
clearly a really
Uh,
good writer.
Clearly,
Good writer.
she did pretty good. She did pretty good. But I think the thing that like is interesting about high school in particular is that there's like I don't think people think about it in the moment, but there's almost like a mythology to it where it's
Hmm.
like you mythologize these relationships and you come up with your own headcanons of like this is how things work and everything like that. And the only person who can see through the nonsense is somebody who's not been part of it before.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what makes Abby such a good focal point for this story is because she's like the only one who kind of recognizes that this story is full of holes. Not your story, the story that they're telling.
Yeah. No, I think that like, I mean, I remember when Nicole and I started talking about this idea of a chorus in the school of all this kind of like, this kind of river of talk that's kind of always flowing through the school of everybody saying like one person says something and then everybody else echoes it like, oh my God, she must have had a broken heart. Oh my God, yes, that's it. Like, like, did you hear? Obviously, like how everything kind of like moves around in this kind of like ecosystem, especially at a small school. Like one thing you could say is there's no secrets. The other thing you can say is it's kind of built to reinforce the message of a few, right? The message of the few becomes the message of the many, and then that just becomes the truth. And
Yeah.
what it's like if, I think also Abby is somebody who has been the source of rumors where she knows that it's possible for everybody to agree that something is true that's not true. So she's
I
in
have,
a
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I have the single worst analogy to make to this that is humanly possible. Have you ever seen the movie Johnny Dangerously?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I love Johnny Dangerously, but there's that scene at the end where Michael Keaton is in prison and like somebody passes a message down and it's like completely unintelligible. The grapevine is distorted this message
Right.
beyond words. And Michael Keaton is just like, "Oh, this is what you're saying." He's like, "That's not what I said at all." He's like, "I'm familiar with this grapevine. I know it. I know what happens." It's interesting. Abby Akita, it's like she doesn't speak their language, so she recognizes how messed up it is. The
Yeah.
grapevine always distorts messages, whether you're in Johnny Dangerously or in This Place Kills Me.
Yes. They're very similar. Abby Kita dangerously.
Oh, I love it. You only take her Walkman once. Once.
Yeah. You take my
Um,
Walkman once. Exactly.
I do want to bring up the Walkman because she has her tape collection, which is filled with bands like Blondie and Joy Division and REM. I love looking at the stuff that Nicole did just to like showcase all the bands. There's a lot more tapes than that. And while there's a lot more to the tapes than that, they're like a very core narrative device in a very specific way that I will not reveal. But I am curious. Somebody recently told me something about how like entertainment, the things that you choose to enjoy, the things that you love are like a window into your soul in some ways. How much did you and Nicole talk about the music?
We didn't talk about it a ton. Um, I think that we more talked about the visual aspects of it than the music.
Okay,
I
okay.
really liked the idea that she was a fan of REM, like back in when, like where REM was when she would have been a fan of them, which means she was like hardcore fan, right? Like this
Is
wasn't
this the
Shiny Happy
80s?
People. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
okay,
this would
yeah,
have
yeah.
been like early days.
Hmm.
Um, but I like the idea that she was kind of on the cutting edge of like that sort of thing. I never was. I was not on the cutting edge of any musical moment. I
So
had a
Abby's an
friend who
aspirational
was.
figure.
Yes, I had a friend who's still my friend in high school, and she's still my friend now. And she was the one who was like, she introduced me to Nine Inch Nails. And then basically when she did that, I stopped listening to everything else and just was like, I like this. But she was always when she was like, always the one who was like making me mixtapes of like bands that I would lose the cover immediately. And then I would never know whose band this, like what band this was, but I just love that song.
Hmm. I want to say, tying into the year, I one time talked to Ed Brubaker about one of the books he does with Sean Phillips, Reckless, which was set in like the um, 70s, 80s, 90s, and stuff like that. And he said that like one of the reasons why he was telling a mystery story set in that period is because not having all the technology we have
Oh,
available to us
key.
now. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think people think about that, but as soon as you bring in the internet, throws off everything, and that's not very visually interesting. You need investigations in a mystery story, and I mean, it seems like that was that part of the reason why you said it when you did.
Oh yeah, that's one of the reasons why roaming is set when it is. That's one of the reasons why skim is set when it is. Like Laura Dean, she almost never uses any of that stuff. Like I'm a Luddite. Like I was just, I'm too old to act like I get social media. Like I have Instagram, but that's as far as it goes. I can't go to TikTok. Like that is where I stop. Like I was just like, I can't, we're not doing that. Um, I also think that there's just something too, like I just watched social studies on FX or Hulu,
Hmm.
wherever it was, which was about like a bunch of teenagers in Hollywood and their use of social media. And I do think that there is a really important story to tell about teenagers and that world and how things get echoed, like how you are living with this constant, very potent narrative, a fictional narrative in your phone all the time about who you're supposed to be. It's just not mine. Like I cannot get anywhere near that because I had like 17 magazine. That was what I had, at that age where I was like, I feel like I should be wearing more peach clothing because that is what I see. Like I didn't see myself. So like obviously I have all those things, but it's nowhere near what it is now with teenagers. So I'm really excited for the next generation of writers who are really going to capture that to like do that. But that's not my job. I think my job is to like, you know, create these narratives out of that kind of like loneliness that comes when the only thing you have is like a voice on a Walkman. Like that's what I had.
Yeah. I think you handle it very well. But just a few more questions on this book. Were there any characters that surprised you or evolved as you worked on this book? I have a theory, but I could be wrong about that theory.
They all did really. I think
Yeah.
other than Abby, who stayed pretty consistent. Claire, who's kind of
She's the
Abby's
pick.
roommate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we just sort of found, and it's funny because, I do think in the end, like I do think the story gets warmer and more interesting as Claire's there. And
Yeah.
I really like Claire. And I think if there was ever to be something else, I would love for there to be that kind of dynamic. I think that's really great. Um, so yeah, Claire. I mean everybody, but definitely Claire. And I think the more we sort of like played with this idea of somebody who wants to be a journalist and that kind of like evolution from being someone who's like, I'm a journalist, I'm reporting on the world as I see it, versus like for someone to challenge you and say, like, you're not. If you're reporting, then how come you're not noticing any of the stuff that's going on?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's because, I mean, at least in the beginning, my read on it is she's like almost like a fan journalist in some ways, where
Yeah.
yeah, like she's like so into the troop that she's just like, oh my God, they're like the stars. I got to know them. I love that character though, because, um, roommates are complicated, especially
Oh,
ones where you
yes.
don't choose them. And like the fact that her and Abby have their relationship evolves throughout the book. In a way, I actually kind of think she's like the hinge point of the whole book, because
Yeah.
like once their relationship changes, I think it changes the entire nature of the book in a very positive way. And that's part of the reason I almost felt like when I was reading it that like the two of you are like, I think Claire needs to be a bigger part of this.
Oh, definitely. As we kept going, I think the thing was that we were just like, it's really tricky in a comic that doesn't have a kind of like narration because then your character isn't really talking to anybody. And because we had sort of decided that we weren't going to do that, that we were just like, she just needs to talk to somebody. Like, it's so, like, here's the thing, it's completely realistic that as someone who is alone is not talking to anybody. But
Right.
we were just like, it's just not really working in this way that we really like. So I think we just kept playing with Claire more and more. And, like, I think, yeah, there's something really fascinating. My first year of university, watching everybody who had roommates, like that was intense. To see how people dealt with roommates in university, like somebody you're best friends with and then you're not best friends with, or you hate and then you love. Like it was so fascinating to see. It was like a little, Dallas on the fifth floor where
Oh
everybody had
yeah.
roommates. You were like, that is an intense area to be in.
I was lucky. I went to college with a group of my best friends,
Right.
and I was in a quad with two of them, and the fourth person was basically an agent of chaos. And
Yeah.
it was like, it was weird. It was like, we were like, oh yeah, we're like totally harmonious. And he's like, I'm going to mess up your harmony, but sometimes
Yeah.
enhance the harmony. It's very confusing. I don't know what's going to happen next.
One of my favorite books is this book by Lynn Cody called The Antagonist. And it's from the perspective of like the guy who is the sort of agent of chaos, kind of weird bully, but it's him telling the story.
Oh boy.
It's so good. If you leave this podcast with nothing but you go read Lynn Cody's The Antagonist, it's the best.
I mean, that sounds really fascinating because there's the idea that everyone's the hero of their own story, but what if you're the agent of chaos also?
Yes, and
What an odd combo.
it's him writing a letter to like the normal guy that's like he's so pissed off. So it's like you're really in the sort of the life and like POV of this like jerk who's
Yeah.
writing like this angry kind of Facebook message to this guy.
Oh my
So
God.
good.
The last thing I want to bring up with This Place Kills Me is something that it came up in the acknowledgments because it's not very often you see somebody thank actress Ali Sheedy, who is the daughter of your agent Charlotte Sheedy, for her
Yes.
advice and insight that she brought to the project. I have my headcanon as to what Ali Sheedy brought to this project, but I have to ask, what part did Ali Sheedy play in the development of this book?
That's so funny. So Charlotte Sheedy is Ali Sheedy's mom.
Right.
Charlotte Sheedy, who's my agent, is Ali Sheedy's mom. And she's an incredible agent. And like, shout out to agents who are incredible because they really are like, they really look after you in this business in a way that is so important. And I had been working on another book and I needed like I just wanted like another set of eyes on it. And Charlotte was like, you should send it Allie. Allie's a great reader. Uh, and she is amazing. She has such a great insight. And as somebody who was also around in the 80s, I basically was like, would you read this? And if anything jumps out at you as being like, there's no way somebody would say or do that, like, can you? And she's incredible. She's just like it's like I'm very lucky I have like a core group. I have, my partner Heather Gold, who's my partner and also a writer. I have this librarian friend in Toronto, Kim Trusty, who like reads my stuff all the time. And I have Ali Sheedy, who also reads the stuff. And it's so hard to have a sense of what you're writing sometimes. And I think it's just such a relief to have somebody who you can trust to tell you, like, this is okay, or I think you need to fix this.
Yeah. I mean, not to boil her down to one very specific role, but it's not very often that somebody who's writing a story about 80s high school
Yeah.
and then they get a member of the Breakfast Club to read it as a person who's going to advise you. I mean, that's not bad. Good. When I came across that in the acknowledgments, I'm like, well, I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's very, it's funny because I do think, like you sort of forget, like I think of her as my agent's daughter.
Right. I know, and that's the funny thing. It's just like it's one of those things where it's like it's normalized for some people, and then for somebody like me, I'm like, wait a second, what?
I mean, it's funny, like, because I worked on Monarch, which is the Apple TV show, Godzilla show.
Yeah.
And so Kurt Russell was in it. And so when we were working on season 2, like every once in a while we were talking, when you're just sort of talking, and then you're like, oh, right, you're Kurt Russell, who was in The Thing. Like every once in a while, you're just like thinking of this person as like someone that you're working with who is working with you on this scene. And then, like I would just like picture him with like a leather sombrero and be like, right, that's who you are. You're Kurt Russell from Overboard. Just like this like flash of like, wait, yes, that's also who you are. Good to know.
I actually forgot that you worked on Monarch. I remember seeing your name in the credits in the first season. It's funny, like what a low-key spectacular comic extravaganza that is with you and Matt Fraction on board. Probably
Really?
somebody else that I'm forgetting.
What's I'll add Al Letson, who is what is the comic he's doing? And it's the character that was just in the Superman, Mr. Terrific.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, Al Letson, writer of Mr. Terrific, is also working and has worked on Monarch.
Amazing.
So
Uh,
comics wise, is pretty heady group of people.
Pretty, yeah, no kidding. So to close, I want to talk about where you find yourself now. You already talked about how you have another project coming up, but This Place Kills Me is almost behind you in release, even though I'm sure you've been done with it for like a year or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's next for you. I'm sure you have plenty coming. You always have a lot going on. You have like curating and editing on Shirley books. You have writing books, graphic novels, and single issue comics. Plenty of other things, I'm sure. You've been making comics for a while now. Like, do you have a sense at this point in your life? I know you have a lot of interest, but what's the right mix for you at this point? Or are you always just interested in finding new things and trying to change that mix from time to time?
I mean, I'm really into changing the mix as much as possible. I think one thing that I'm kind of looking for is a nonfiction project that, because especially working on Shirley books and, looking at queer history and stuff like that, there's definitely a lot of things that I'm kind of fascinated by. And I am a huge fan of, nonfiction comics, and there's been so many really amazing ones. So, um, that's something, I mean, I'm always looking for something I've never done before because I do think I think it's important to challenge yourself as a writer. Yeah, I have like a bunch of things coming up. Uh, like I have this like notebook that has a bunch of notebooks in it, one for each project, and I had to make another notebook so I could put more notebooks in it. That's where I'm at now. But yeah, I love having freedom and I love having restrictions. I love having a character that I can kind of like make up the world and kind of, make surprising things happen. And I also love, especially within the DC world, I love getting to work with, you know, those properties that, and the sort of history of them, and like getting to write Batman and stuff like that is something I really love to do.
Well, you do an amazing job, Mariko,
Thank
but
you.
that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about This Place Kills Me, collaboration, your career, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me.